August 31st to clean up the property. So we've been meeting with them, discussing a plan for them to clean this up. The bylaw officers attended the site recently, and they have concerns about them meeting the timeline. So we're trying to see if there's any other options for them. Otherwise, I believe it has to go back to court to have the judge rule on this. 3226 Myers Road. This is an untidy and unsightly. The owners did respond to a demand letter from the lawyer, and they are from out of town. They're saying they're going to come here this summer to clean it up. So we're going to give them that time, and then after that, if they don't meet that timeline by the end of the summer, we'll have to determine the next steps with the lawyer. And then 600 East Similkameen Road. This was a build without permit. I believe it's also being operated as an Airbnb. It was a new unit constructed. They have contacted us since we got the resolution, but there's several planning and provincial approvals required in order. So it's a complex approval process, and we're not quite sure if they're going to be able to meet it, and they haven't contacted us since May 24th and giving them the information they need to provide. So on to planning services.
Great. Okay, so just a quick overview of our applications and referrals before I move on to projects. We are pretty much on par application and referral wise as we were last year. So we're looking at approximately 90 applications that we received and 42 referrals. Now, looking at the breakdown then with development applications by electoral area, this is fairly standard. Most of our applications did come in from Area A, and the runner-ups would be Area D and E. And H, yes. And then just looking into our delegated development variance permit update here, since that's a fairly new process that we've been going through. We did receive 14 development variance permit applications in Q1 and 9 in Q2. 11 applications were approved by the board, whereas 12 were approved under delegation. We have been seeing that 50% ratio of applications being approved under delegation versus by the board, so that's pretty constant. Now moving on to projects, with respect to the regional growth strategy, we have just finished up our APC consideration. So the plan right now is to go back to Planning and Development Committee with the results in August, and then go back to the municipal councils prior to consideration of first and second reading. So that is slowly moving forward. With respect to the electoral area E OCP review, we did finalize a draft of that bylaw in Q2 and had sent out agency referrals and have presented that draft OCP to committee as well. So we are currently in the process of undertaking a survey for that OCP just to elicit feedback from the public regarding that draft. And then we're going to wrap up community engagement and then finalize that the draft bylaw just after we've been able to review any agency feedback as well as public feedback, and then we will bring it back for consideration of first reading in Q3. And then with respect to the environmentally sensitive development permit area review, as the board is aware, we did receive that effectiveness audit overview that was presented to planning and development at the last board meeting. However, the province and federal government's contractor was unable to provide a presentation at that time and speak to any concerns or questions that the board may have had. With that being said, the consideration of the associated amendment bylaw has been deferred until Stantec is able to come back and speak to the board. In terms of the subdivision servicing bylaw review, we did engage with a consultant to assist us with updating the water and sewer design schedules. So the plan for Q3 is to finalize those design schedules, bring it back to P&D, and also discuss the potential of incorporating the manufactured home park regulations bylaw, as well as the campground regulations bylaw into the new subdivision servicing bylaw, considering the amount of overlap that we've seen. So look forward for that. Look for that in the next couple of board meetings here. And the Falder Zone review, as you all may know, really ramped up in Q2. We did end up adopting all the associated amendment bylaws with that at the June 15th, 2023 meeting. So we are grateful to see that project complete. And in terms of the vacation rental review, we did undertake a community survey, which was presented at the March 16th, 2023 P&D committee meeting. And you all have also seen the presentation that the City of Penticton staff presented on their short-term rental benefits and impact studies. So we're currently working on drafting the request for proposals, just so that we can get a better handle on scoping the project. But we are hoping that that RFP will be completed by the end of the month here. Now, with respect to the housing options project that we have going on, we did present an options paper back in March. Currently, we have a amendment. We do have one strategic planning project moving forward as part of that, being the mobile homeland area requirement amendment bylaw. So that was initiated on June 15th, 2023. However, the rest of that project will be dependent on completing all of our other projects. And we did complete a number of different strategic planning projects over this last quarter, including the development permit offenses amendment bylaw. We completed the MTI bylaw review, as well as the Board of Variance meeting schedule review, as well as the watercourse development permit processing timelines amendments. We are currently undertaking other projects as well, including the Section 52 agreement with the Ministry of Transportation. We are currently participating in the OBWB 1 hectare policy review, as well as the geotechnical report requirements review. And lastly, we have deferred the Chadwell Place setback review to Q3 as well. So lots of ongoing projects, and hopefully we'll be making a lot more progress in the next quarter. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Are there any questions for Shannon here?
Director Kanoda, I have my hand up. I just don't know if you can see me. Oh, there I am. Thanks. I just wanted to quickly touch on a few things, if that's okay. The soil deposition bylaw, I just wanted to recognize that we all received a letter from somebody who just was caught in the testing process just recently. And it's hard when you're in the middle of that testing and you weren't realizing that that was something you have to deal with, and then now you have to deal with it. And I understand the frustration. So I think we've got about a 6-month period that we're going to look at, and then we're going to reevaluate some of the feedback and the comments, see if we can make it better. It's really tricky having to regulate people with common sense, because we're always regulating those that are pushing the boundary, and that's the struggle that we're having with this case. The TUP, I do have a question about that. Did I hear correctly that when you're investigating the TUPs, it's because they're operating a TUP without a license, and that not because there's a noise complaint or something like that?
I believe that was. Yeah. So I think that was. So yeah, generally they wouldn't have a license, and then we'd be investigating based on that premise. So. Okay,
thank you. And just as a quick follow-up, Chair, if I might, I think we are looking at the TUP process soon. Is that happening sometime soon?
Yeah. Are you indicating like short-term rentals?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. Perfect. And then my last comment is thank you very much to planning staff on that Falder Zone review. That was an incredible amount of work. I don't think any of us anticipated how much work that was, but thank you. And the overwhelming response from the community was of support and appreciation for taking their concerns seriously. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Director Gittins. Director Taylor, please.
Oh, thanks very much. And similarly, my compliments to both groups here. On the vacation policy or short-term rental study that's coming up, I just want to flag, we had the Penticton people come in, they've done their study. I think it was very informative for us to listen to that. They're kind of going status quo route. Kelowna has done a study, and they're leading to a considerably tighter approach. I just hope staff are aware of that and following that. And So then question, this process, and I'm showing my ignorance here, does the board look at the basic terms, scope, parameters of RFPs?
Ms. Dong, please.
Yeah, if we're directed, Mr. Chair, otherwise we would just develop the terms of reference and go out for proposals and then bring that back. So if you wanted to look at the terms of reference, I just understand that will take more time, but we could certainly put that on.
Can you follow up, Director Taylor?
No, I just hope you, this is really important, that's all.
Thank you. I've got three waiting, Director Monteith, Director Coyne, and Director Johansson, please.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm looking for an update on the property on Highway 3A that was running a vacation rental that had a stop work order, and I've had no updates since, so looking for some information on that.
Yeah, so that one's still under enforcement. They had ceased operating that vacation rental. We saw one review on the website that indicated they might have rented it in the meantime. I'm trying to think of the date when we touched back on that. They had reached out to us to get an architect to legitimize it, so it would still be in limbo at this point, but it is with our lawyers at this point as well.
Thank you. Director Coyne, oh, you're waving off. Director Johansson, please.
No questions for me, Chair. Thank you.
Director Coyne Senior, please.
Yeah, to Mark, it's not a question, but a compliment. The new bylaw procedure seems to be working very well with contacting the people involved that you've dealt with out here. People seem really happy with having somebody come out that they can talk to, and that's been greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Coyne. Any other questions? Director Gettens, I see your hand.
Thanks, Chair. Just really quickly on the development variance permits that are approved by the administration by delegation by administration. How do we get notification on those? Like, I think it's on the website, and then if it's approved, it goes on. But did directors find out about it, or did the citizens find out about it?
Whoever cares to answer that, please.
Yeah, so when we receive the development variance permit applications, we would typically update our webpage just within a couple of days if possible, and then we would notify the relevant director. So that would be, pre-decision. Once a decision is made by staff, we would typically send out a confirmation letter to the applicant, and I believe a paper copy is also provided to the relevant director, if not also by email.
Thank you. Any other questions for panelists? Seeing none, that will conclude our activity report, and that's all that I have for planning and development. So I'm looking for a motion to move out of planning and development. Director Roberts, second. Director Bush, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, we will pass back to Chair Pendergrass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Knodel. We now move into protective services, and for that one, I will go to Director Roberts. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to call to order the Protective Services Committee at 9:32. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda? Director Bush, Director Knodel, all in favor? Okay, we have right now, it looks like we have a delegation from Sundog Solutions. I'll pass it over to the CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This was a study that ended in April, and we've had it back to committee for discussion, but we didn't have the consultants available at that meeting. So there was a request that Sundog Solutions appear and present their emergency program study And then the board can feel comfortable asking them questions as to what they have recommended. So we'll just pass that over to the consultant, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, CAO.
Good morning. Do we also have Sarah with speaking capability? Just checking.
I'm here.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right, let me get my screen up here. Can everybody see that? Yes.
Looks good.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us to be able to provide a summary of the Regional Emergency Program review that we completed. For those that don't know me, my name is Amanda Newell, and I'm joining you today from Whitehorse, Yukon, where I'm sitting as Deputy Director in the Territorial Emergency Coordination Center for the wildfire season. And I have my colleague for this project, Sarah Morgan, who's joining us from Squamish. So I just wanted to start out with a little bit of a review of how this project came about, as outlined in the terms of reference. So over the last 5 years or so, the RDOS has seen a significant increase in EOC activations in response to large-scale emergency events, and this trend is expected to continue. So what we've observed about these trends is that they're not a linear progression, and we're not sure where the particular tipping points are, but this speaks to the importance of scaling up resources appropriately. According to the terms of reference, the Regional Emergency Management Program is not seen to be meeting citizen expectations. And due to this perception, the RDOS is interested in gathering feedback, identifying service gaps, and determining how to better position itself for the APA modernization. And decided a full review of the Regional Emergency Management Program would be the best way to achieve that. So the research components that informed the review and the subsequent recommendations were achieved by developing and conducting a public perception survey, as well as in-person focus groups. We did a literature review to examine current regulatory bylaw, annual work plans, budget, staffing, and policies compared to industry standards, a list of comparable local governments to benchmark against. We did a review of long-term EOC activation history to identify trends. We did an examination of the interactions, working relationships, and arrangements with regional, interregional partner organizations. We identified staffing, structural and staffing level requirements. Investigated the EOC versus site management capabilities. Reviewed whether policies, procedures, and staffing are meeting the requirements. Provided an opinion on whether the current program will meet anticipated legislative changes, and we reviewed the current EPC, so Emergency Program Coordinator, and the Emergency Support Services Duty Officer on-call process. So while the review focused on evaluating the current practices of the RDOS Regional Emergency Management Program and identification of gaps in service, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the many areas of strength that were also identified during this process. So notably, there have been some adjustments to the program over the past 5 years with the addition of a dedicated emergency program coordinator in late 2019 and a turnover mid last year with a new emergency program coordinator starting in the midst of responding to the Karamias Creek wildfire. So despite those factors, some of the themes that emerged from speaking with stakeholders and partners were the emergency management staff's knowledge of EOC processes, as well as support received from other RDOS staff assigned to the EOC. And with the EOC activated as often as it is, staff are able to stay somewhat familiar with plans and processes and be able to stand up quite easily. The public notification system is another strength worth mentioning, as nearly 100% of the survey respondents noted that they are subscribed to the system. And I'll finish off with the recognition received from several entities on department staff going above and beyond to support response agencies. So moving on to public engagement. We started out with a public survey distributed by the RDOS comms team. The survey received nearly 500 responses, which provided an excellent snapshot of citizen needs. In addition to the online survey, we also facilitated in-person focus groups to allow citizens to further explore some of the topics and converse with each other, which allowed us to better get some clarity on some of the themes that arose during the survey. So following the public engagement, we held workshops for identified stakeholders and facilitated SWOT analyses with each of them to better understand individual needs and perceived gaps with a solutions-focused lens. And the groups we engaged were the volunteer fire departments, the regional emergency program coordinators, including the surrounding Indigenous emergency program coordinators, this emergency support services teams, regional and provincial response agencies, and yourselves, the RDOS Board of Directors. So as part of an extensive literature review to identify best practice and gaps in policy and procedure, we reviewed a number of RDOS internal documents related to the program, including the regulatory bylaw, historical EOC data, duty officer on-call process, after action reports, and the overall emergency program structure. And to establish a benchmark for best practice, we also reviewed publicly available data related to local government emergency management within the context of the Emergency Program Act modernization. So to support the literature review, we identified 6 regional districts, 5 within or 6 in BC and 1 in Alberta, that have similar populations, geographic area, hazard profiles, and regular EOC activations, to do a bit of a comparison amongst the programs. So the local governments that we included in this comparison were Regional District of Central Kootenay, Cowichan Valley Regional District, Caribou Regional District, Fraser Valley Regional District, Squamish-Lillooet Regional District, Thompson Okanagan Regional District, and for Alberta, the Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo. Notably, the comparison identified that since 2018, most regional districts have increased their emergency program staff numbers or are in the process of doing so now. The RDOS is the only regional district that doesn't have a regional fire chief staff position to support volunteer fire departments. And of those regional districts surveyed, none have a process for deploying office-based staff out to the site to gain situational awareness. So as part of our review, we also evaluated the RDOS's regional emergency management program using criteria established by the BC Auditor General that is used when conducting audits of selected local government emergency programs against the requirements of the Emergency Program Act. And so overall, the RDOS scored in the partly achieved category, with some criteria being fully achieved and one criteria that was not achieved. And that was the local government has an emergency support services strategy. So while there are teams established throughout the region, there is no formal plan or strategy in place at the moment. The previous sections provided a high-level overview of the extensive research conducted throughout the course of the review, and we'll cap this off with 4 of the key findings that we've identified. First, the regional district comparison shows that the emergency program budget is at the low end for a regional district this size. And the structure and work allocation for the 2 existing emergency management staff does not reflect the amount of time needed to maintain the program appropriately. The current on-call process for both the emergency management and the emergency support services duty officer is unsustainable as is and is not supported by a worker safety protocol. And finally, a more integrated approach to emergency management with rural communities is critical to improving preparedness and strengthening resilience throughout the region. So in the interest of time, the next 2 slides will list out the 12 main recommendations that came out of the review. And then I'll make a short note on the rationale behind each one. So number 1 is increase overall capacity and improve retention. And so this is based on larger and extended response events being expected to occur more often, and a comprehensive approach is required where staff, volunteer, and contract human resources are all utilized for sustainable operations. So the goal is to have a capacity to surge operations when needed and to allow for appropriate and legislatively mandated periods of rest and recovery. Number 2 was increase emergency program staffing. And so that's based on a review of minimum requirements under the Emergency Program Act and regulations, outstanding after action recommendations from previous events, EOC days activated, the need for succession planning and distributed knowledge, and anticipated additional requirements under new disaster and emergency management legislation. So currently there are 2 emergency program staff, 1 manager, and 1 emergency program coordinator. Existing work plan items far exceed the capacity of staff to achieve those. Number 3 is provide a dedicated staff member to support volunteer fire departments. It's hard to overstate how much value a volunteer fire department brings to its community, well beyond the core purpose of a structural fire protection branch. Members are known and trusted within their communities, and communities commit significant financial support through taxation to maintain a volunteer fire department presence in their community. The increasing strain placed on volunteer fire department members and fire chiefs with call-out volume increases, the cost of maintaining a regulatory compliant department increases exponentially, and volunteer fire departments are increasingly relied upon in their communities as the primary and often the only first responder presence. So the RDOS is the only regional district, as I mentioned before, of those surveyed that does not have a regional fire chief, fire services administrator, fire services training coordinator, or a similar dedicated staff member positioned to support the volunteer fire departments. Number 4 is develop a sustainable emergency duty officer roster. The current system is not sustainable or fully reliable due to the impracticality of having only 2 people responsible for being on call 24/7, 365 days a year. This is reflected in the existing draft process document, which is not being implemented at the moment, having 4 backup numbers, two of whom are the existing duty officers already, so not really backup numbers. Number 5 is increase emergency support services, resources, plans, and policies. So effective ESS services across a regional district require dedicated staff time from an ESSD or an emergency support services director, qualified staff member to provide regional coordination for larger events, to leverage all available resources, and advocate for the wider group of jurisdictions, liaise with municipal and Indigenous ESSDs, joint planning, training, exercises, and volunteer recruitment, retention, and appreciation. So there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining an ESS program. And while municipal teams naturally focus on events within their boundaries, evacuated regional district residents will gravitate towards whichever town they are most familiar with for goods and services. So making regional coordination and planning essential, both to support the regional district evacuees and to lessen the load on the municipal teams. Number 6 is increase the pool of assigned and rostered RDOS staff for EOC duties. With the amount of time that staff are spending in the EOC, it is imperative to both operational continuity as well as staff wellness to ensure there is a robust list of qualified staff members that could participate in the EOC at any given time. And number 7 is to develop a community emergency preparedness program. So working with community representatives to develop community emergency preparedness plans that are facilitated by the RDOS, but led by the community and have a common template with annexes specific to the community itself will help build capacity and trust. Working first with communities who have already experienced impacts for emergency events. They are motivated and knowledgeable. And this will help develop practical plans with a local lens for the most likely hazards that will impact the community. Number 8 is prioritize a comprehensive review and update of the 2010 All Hazards Emergency Plan. This is a substantial work item that will require focused effort from a staff member assigned to it. The current plan ticks all the boxes required, but in a number of areas lacks the detail to be operationally useful. And as a consequence, it's not referred to during response at this time. This is a work plan item that is most effectively carried out by staff, not consultants, because staff have the organizational knowledge, access to other departmental staff whose input is required, and the breadth of relationships outside of the organization to create functional plans that intersect well with the plans of response agencies. Number 9 is review relevant service establishment bylaws for emergency program funding against current and future needs. So emergency management, fire services, and associated service establishment bylaws should be updated to provide appropriate levels of funding to the fire departments and the RDOS emergency program to enable various emergency program staff or emergency management program tasks to support at the community level. Number 10 is update the hazard risk and vulnerability analysis, the HRVA. All other plans stem from the understanding of the hazards in your area and the associated level of risk. So the HRVA really creates a basis or a foundation for all other plans that exist within the program. So it would make sense to keep those updated and relevant. Number 11 is develop and update exercise training plan with associated budget. So several of the unactioned recommendations from past after action reviews related to training and exercising needs, while having plans in place is a good basis for programming and can add value to an emergency program if done properly. There's no substitute for bringing all players together and putting those plans into practice in a non-emergent environment. And 12 is update the business continuity plan for the organization as a whole. So ensure that a review of the current business continuity plan details how both the EOC and general functions will be achieved at the same time, with a number of senior managers earmarked for key functions in both types of response. It'd be important to include details of third parties who need to be aware of the RDOS business continuity plan and ensure a test and exercise schedule of the plan is included in the updated plan schedule. And that is it. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll pass it back to the chair for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Newell. Very, very well done. Really enjoyed that. Do we have questions for Ms. Newell? I have Director Knodel.
Thank you. I thought this was a very well done program. I compliment both of you on that. Very well done. Two big things that I noticed. Page 38 that says that the Canadian Armed Forces are being looking to distance themselves from these kind of actions. Is there any information coming out of the provincial government for a replacement for that? We're kind of at a deficit when we look at our neighbors to the south because they use their National Guard to fill in those holes that we don't have access to. Obviously, our military is probably not even the size of a small portion of their National Guard. So we'd have a deficit there. That's the first observation. Secondly is flooding prep. It's hampered quite badly by some of our ministries need for permits and whatnot, especially on where we have creeks crossing properties as opposed to rivers. You know, they're being told to sandbag, but in some cases that would take the National Guard to be able to sandbag and properly prep. So we're running up against some of the ministry's permitting processes in order to actually adequately deal with these. And it's kind of what I'm hearing from our citizens is just get the hell out of our way and we can take care of business, but don't handcuff us. Kind of getting a little bit of that from fire too when we see ranchers that have been in an area for decades and have managed their own being told that they need to get out of the way. Being run by someone who doesn't really have a stake in the area. Just wondering if you have a comment on any of those, but thank you for a job well done.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So in terms of the support, just for publicly wide and not relying too much on the military, I know there are talks happening with BC Wildfire on year-round support there, but there's nothing solid right now, and it really comes down to a capacity issue that would still lie with the local government. But when it comes to individual properties, at this point, it still is with the residents to make sure that their properties are protected on their own land. So that doesn't really help that part of it. And Sarah may have some other insights on this as well. She can speak to it. But in terms of the ministries getting in the way and not having a stake in the properties, I get that completely. I do feel like there's a bit of a missing link between residents wanting to be responsive to their own emergency versus understanding the larger picture, because that's the piece that the responding agencies do have and why they make the decisions that they do. But maybe I'll just pass it to Sarah and see if she has something to add.
Sure, thanks, Amanda. Just first, Director Knödel, on your point about the CAF, I would say that we're seeing, you know, right now in real time that squeeze on the CAF between their international commitments and an expectation that Canada ramps up there, and this very real need that we have in BC right now for their boots on the ground, and that they are being deployed within BC at the moment. So, you know, whatever the CAF's preferences are, they are still responding to the province and just this undeniable need that we have, you know, in these severe wildfire seasons. And then in terms of the point about volunteer fire departments and community members, particularly rural community members who are used to, you know, just sort of pragmatically getting on with it. I think this speaks to the part of the review that talks about developing community emergency plans. And when those are working well, it does enable the community members, local community who have heavy equipment, skills, knowledge, all of those things, to actually utilize them in a way that fits within the regulatory framework. Sometimes people do have the very best of intentions and make things worse. I've actually seen that in my time working with the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. People go and work in a stream and they make things better for their property. They make things worse for somebody who's a little further downstream for them, not at all intentionally. So community emergency management plans, great way to build community links and also really make the most of what is within the community and get out of the community's way while still operating within local government's mandates and requirements. Thank you.
If I might do a quick follow-up on that,
Yes,
in regards to preparation for flooding on creeks and streams, in order to satisfy that one requirement where more damages may be done, we may need to have a system set up where we have professionals that'll help prior to an emergency being declared. When we're asking citizens to fill the Great Pyramid's volume of sandbags and go sandbag a creek on their property, it's not even doable. So maybe we need to get some help prior rather than looking at it as the only time we can help is after the emergency's been declared, by which time generally things are way too late. So maybe adding that into the equation would be a good idea. Once again, I thank you very much.
Well, now I have Director Coyne Jr.
Thank you, and thank you, Amanda. This was a good report. The question I have is around your increased ESS resources. How? Every municipality is struggling with that, and I don't know how we do that at a regional level. I mean, we have a fairly good team that comes together regionally. I just don't know how we expand on that right now. So if your insight on that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to having the capacity within the emergency program to be able to reach out and keep people engaged and interested in the program itself, which speaks to one of the recommendations on having a dedicated ESSD. And then again, working within the municipalities to increase capacity that way. It's really about building those relationships and making sure people stay engaged and that it's not a burden on them to volunteer their time, but rather they're getting something out of it for themselves as well. And I'm not sure if Sarah has other insight on that one either.
Yeah, I would say that the recommendation around having a staff person who is your regional ESSD to coordinate ESS response means there's someone that is their focus. That is their focus during response, and that is their focus outside of response is to work across those teams, work on recruitment materials, get best practice region-wide campaigns going around recruitment, also do that volunteer recognition and reward stuff, all of the stuff that makes people want to stay in a team, join a team, something that's a positive experience, as opposed to hearing, we've got a few people, they're really worn out, here's another response. Things didn't seem to be as coordinated as they could be. Having that coordinator position can be really gold with the right person in there.
So a follow-up to that is we had a regional ESSD and then it's kind of slipped away and became a sidebar to another position. So any indication or does anybody know why we did away with that position? Because we had that regional ESSD, right? And that's how we, what was it? I forget her name. Sorry. Bill or Hunter or somebody.
Could the CAO answer that, or do you know who's more appropriate to answer?
We've never had a full-time emergency support services director. We have had, every time we activate now, we have a liaison within the Emergency Operations Center. Usually we're borrowing from Princeton or Summerland for their ESSDs on that. Under this current CEPF fund that we have, the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, or we did get money for an emergency support services coordinator. We went out and recruited for that, and we didn't get any applications. ESS is very complex now. You have to be a level 4 and in order to use the automated reception center or registration system. And most of our volunteers aren't really interested in that level of support. They're in it for supporting their community and helping their neighbors who are under stress during an event, but they weren't really looking to go to a higher level or a bigger level. So we have a lot of work to do with regards to emergency support services, and that's one of the things that I'm sure the emergency program working group will want to look at. But we've got funds right now. We just haven't been able to find anybody that would step up to that level of work. So we're conscious of it. We talk about it every time we have a CAO group meeting. We talk about it, and we just need to be able to find the resources in order to activate.
Thank you, CAO. Do you follow up on that, Director Coyne? Okay, the next person is Director Coyne Senior. You are mute.
Thank you very much. I guess this question would be for Amanda. I know in the surveys and discussion groups, I was told that there was a lot of discussion, a lot of folks concerned about boots on the ground from the office. Now, you said that other areas don't send anybody out. What do they do? Do they have their staff? How would you ever train like a fire department to deal with extended flooding or that sort of stuff? What do other areas do in that respect?
Ms. Newell?
So yeah, there's two sides here is what I saw during the focus groups when people were talking about boots on the ground. There's boots on the ground that kind of come in as a cavalry of people to help with sandbagging and do that physical labor and the actual management of the emergency. And the other item that people were talking about when they said boots on the ground was just having a representative from the RDOS in the community available to answer questions or interact and just keep people updated. So they were used interchangeably. And so we're trying to clarify that a little bit. Boots on the ground is definitely like a tactical event. And as you're speaking of, yes, it would be whoever is incident commander or first on scene or a first responder. So generally in those rural communities, that is going to fall firstly on the volunteer fire departments because they are the first ones there. Speaking to doing an extended program of how they manage the floods, I can't speak to that. But in terms of what other regional districts are doing, it's fairly similar in the sense that there's a challenge with flooding because there is no clear responding agency identified to manage that, which is much different than a wildfire where BC Wildfire, the agency comes in and manages that. So it's a struggle that other regional districts have as well. But I'm going to pass it to Sarah to provide some insight as well from her perspective.
Thanks, Amanda. If we're talking about gathering situational awareness, which definitely seemed to be one key way, as Amanda said, interpreting that desire for boots on the ground, it was, we want you to see what we're seeing here on the ground, and there was a disconnect during the last response, the atmospheric river responses around that, and a desire to bridge that gap. So in terms of gathering situational awareness, I think the best model that I've seen was the RDCK. They have some kind of volunteer fire department in almost every community, whether that's a brigade or a full volunteer fire department managed by the regional district. In 2 communities, they don't, but they've set up a system where they have a community contact in every community who provides that initial local situational awareness. And then they also have, through their the way their service is set up, a means to actually pay some of those volunteer fire members not as fire members, but as members of the community who have first responder training and can appropriately assess the situation and communicate that situational awareness back to the RDCK EOC. So they're making use of their fire department members, but under temporary staff contracts and some other mechanisms that they can utilize, if you like, that trained human in 2 ways. One, as a direct link to the EOC, and the rest of the time for their fire chief or deputy fire chief hat on, if you like.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Is there a follow-up for that, Director Coyne?
No, thank you.
Okay, next I have Director Taylor.
Yeah, really appreciate your comments just on that last question about how to have boots on the ground in an effective manner from the EOC. To flooding, is there any consideration that you're aware of to expanding the scope of BC Wildfire Service to be available for flood?
I can take that one, Amanda.
Sure.
So in the current system, an EOC can issue a resource request for BC Wildfire crew to assist with flooding preparation or flood response in that boots on the ground sense of assisting with sandbagging to protect critical infrastructure, evacuation routes, that kind of thing, which can also protect homes as well. So that is an option that's available now, where crews are available before the wildfire season gets going. The key to that is standing up the EOC and getting a task number when flooding looks like it might happen, before being actually in the thick of it. And that can be tricky with the pre-oc to lay out the case that you need a task number now, and particularly in rural areas. Sometimes that flooding might happen, sometimes it might not. But to stand up and have those resources and prepare for it is critical, because as you say, once you're in the thick of it, it's too late to try to stand up those resources and that delay in the response window. So BC Wildfire Crews, it is an option now. If that capacity is there, it's about the timing.
And maybe if
I see CAO Newell, you have a response to something there?
I just wanted to jump in. So BC Wildfire will help if they're not deployed. We have used them extensively for sandbag cities and helping to put sandbags out. They're very efficient that way, and they're very organized, and they come in with their own supervisors. The other thing is the rural fire departments are in a vulnerable situation in some ways, in that they are very connected to the community and they support the community. They don't always, and they'll get out and they'll fill in sandbags and they'll volunteer and they'll do whatever they need to do. They don't always like to be the one making the decision as to who gets wet and who stays dry, because that can cause friction in their community. So we have varying agreement between the chiefs as to what their role should be during a wildfire event, what it should be during a flooding event, and of course during the fire events. They're often deployed. They're out helping other communities, even outside of our region. So it's a evolving situation with regards to that sort of boots on the ground. The province is coming up with a program, they're just calling them flood monitors. And that's something that we've been looking into. We're very interested in that. We think, along with these community emergency response plans that the consultants have recommended, that that might be something that we could build into that, is not only activating when developing a plan and activating under an event, but also helping out or organizing volunteers in their community, but also being that situational awareness, especially in a flood event. Fires, not so much. I mean, we have pretty good reaction time on that, but for flooding, to get that situational awareness, because you don't want to put people that don't have swift water training into an event where they're going to be in danger. So that's something we need to work on for sure.
Ms. Newell, you were about to say?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add as a caveat to what Sarah had mentioned. 2 points. If you want to get what we'll call proactive support for flood management in terms of placing sandbags and getting some personnel support, there is wording around that. It's not going to be for individual properties. It's going to be to protect critical infrastructure and those kind of things. That's where the province would be potentially on board with you guys moving in a proactive direction rather than waiting until the flooding has already happened. So it really would depend on the wording that's used for them to support that. And then second to that is that when BC Wildfire does come in to support, they're supporting in filling sandbags and critical infrastructure protection. Again, they do not enter onto personal property and place sandbags that way. So if we're looking for some solutions for how we support residents in protecting their own properties, as the example came up, a stream flowing through someone's yard. Again, I think the community preparedness program is the way to go on that. But I think as hard as it is for us to come to terms with, is that residents also need to take some personal onus on understanding the risk on their own property and being proactive about that themselves. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Is it a short follow-up, Director Taylor, or is it a new question? Because otherwise I'll go to first Director Coyne Jr.
No, it was a follow-up.
Okay, go ahead.
Just want to know, really, I was asking, is there any effort within the BC government that you're aware of to expand BC Wildfire's mandate to really manage flood response? Because I don't see it right now as being anybody's response right now.
No, and even if they move to potentially being better situated to support, they will never be managing the flood response. That will never be within their mandate. I won't say never, but I don't see that happening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newell. Director Coyne Jr.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up to what Bill was saying with the fire departments and kind of being stretched to the thin there with making those decisions sometimes. The regional district is a big area. I think one of the, especially over in our neck of the woods, I think one of the problems is there's that feeling of a disconnect between the EOC that's over in Penticton and what's happening in, say, rural Princeton, Tulameen, even Karamias. Would you suggest that, it wouldn't be the EOC, but there would be like a forward, command position or a couple people that were here to assist relaying that information back that's not the fire department, because the fire department gets tired, right? In Tulameen, when that was happening, those poor folks out there were pretty much on their own for, days on end, and without any of that logistical support on the ground so much. Somebody might drive over for a couple minutes and then drive back, but there was no ongoing support. And then so the residents feel disconnected, they feel alone, the emergency teams in the area feel disconnected and alone. Is there a suggestion or a comment you can make on how we should be operating in that respect?
Ms. Newell?
Yeah, so no doubt communication during any type of emergency is always going to be a challenge. I think specifically for the RDOS and the area that you cover and the amount of remote and rural communities that you do have, it just adds to that. And from our perspective, that really is where that community preparedness plan comes in, as well as looking into how the volunteer fire departments can better be supported. And so those 2 points came up in the review. There is a communication link that could happen to better bring that information back to the EOC, whether that's actually putting an RDOS employee in the thick of it or not. I'm can't say whether that would work or not. I'm just relaying the information that that's not something that most regional districts do, and that part of that is due to liability. Part of that is due to the resources that they have available for the EOC they need in the EOC. So sending someone out to the field would really decrease the capacity that they have for managing the entire event. So some of the other resources that are available and out there, such as search and rescue, who do have swift water training, who can communicate with your volunteer fire departments. But also if it's not a community-wide, but like a fairly isolated incident, having your community preparedness program and having some direct community links that could support bringing information into the community for those affected could be a good interim solution.
And CAO Newell?
Yeah, this is another one of those difficult ones. I mean, with fires, BC Wildfire is going to be jumping in there, and their site command. And they establish their incident management team, and they relate well with the EOC. With a flood or a slide, in an incorporated community, often the Public Works Department may be the site command for that, and then they're supported by the EOC because they've got heavy equipment and they've got the labor, and they're more used to dealing with infrastructure. In unincorporated areas, we don't have in most areas, first of all, we don't have a water or wastewater system, so we don't have a Public Works function in most of them, so we don't have an immediate response. And to tell you the truth, in most cases, the citizens don't even recognize that the volunteer fire departments are the regional district of Okanagan-Similkameen. Those are our representatives in most of our rural communities, but we don't promote that well, and I'm not sure the fire departments actually see that themselves, that they are regional district of Okanagan-Similkameen. We don't have that sort of organizational structure that supports that sort of a concept. But in this case, in a flood, we probably would rely on the fire department to be the sort of the regional district representatives in the community, but we don't sell it that way. So there's another issue that was raised during the program study that we have to figure that out. I mean, that may help us fully resolve finally how we're going to respond to floods in communities, because other than fires, that seems to be our biggest threat right now.
It's at the ambulance station.
What time's he coming?
Thank you, CAO. Sorry that I just had somebody pop their head in. Director Knodel.
I'm kind of noticed a little bit of a, I guess I'd call it a disconnect on a couple of things. Sometimes it's not realized that some of the rural properties are extremely huge. So even in the case of fire smarting, when it's left to the individual, that becomes a daunting program to do underneath the, with the terms of management that we've kind of given fire smarting. Second to that, a lot of these properties, we're saying, yes, it's the responsibility of the property owner. But many years ago, I had a sit down with Fire Officer Jim Mottershaw, and he explained how we've actually been complacent with our conservation movements in creating an extremely high fire hazard. And we've kind of got the similar issue with flood preparedness too, is the areas are daunting, when you have a large stream crossing. And even if it doesn't affect that particular property, preparing for it means that if you're not preparing on your property, the properties on either side of you, downstream, upstream, can be in jeopardy if you're not doing all these things that are necessary. So we might have to expand that view. And one other little point, I don't believe we can use the fire department's for sandbagging and preparedness unless there's been an emergency declared. So perhaps CAO Noel can clarify that for me, but I had it in the back of my mind that they were not available for volunteer sandbagging as a unit unless there was an emergency. Thank you.
You still there, Director?
The audio left me altogether there for a bit.
Yeah. You're muted, Director Roberts. Go ahead.
Oh, that'll help. Sorry, I was passing it on to CAO Newell to answer Director Knodl's question.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Director Knodl?
I was under the impression that fire departments could not be deployed to prepare sandbagging unless an emergency has been, or emergency notice had been declared. So I'm not sure about that. And the other ones were just the size of some of these properties that are in need of being prepared, either fire smart or water prepared. Thank you.
CAO?
Okay, so typically, if there is an event, the Emergency Coordination Center will give us a call. We'll activate, we'll get a task number from pre-OC, and then we can start submitting expense authorization forms. And that's where Director Knodl is indicating that we could pay resources like the fire department for that sort of activity. So yes, that is only during a period when either people or infrastructure are in imminent danger. You can't do it as sort of a maintenance type of activity. Typically what happens is the volunteer firefighters volunteer, and they go out and they fill in sandbags and they distribute them as volunteers. So there's that saw-off between, what sort of a program do we have right now? There's the other big issue that we have to decide is what can we include under the regional emergency management program, and how much is that going to support the rural residents? Because again, on any regional program, the incorporated communities pay about 75% of that. So we have some issues. We have some big issues to discuss.
Just to interject a bit, CAO Noel, quite often what I've seen is that the volunteers are there. What it lacks is the organization, and the fire chiefs are reluctant to stick their nose into organizing. They get a little confused by that. If an emergency edict hasn't been dropped, that they're not to get involved. So maybe we need some clarification there that they're still available to do volunteer work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Knodl. I see Director Frago. Yeah. Hello, where am I seeing your hand up or?
Yep, thank you through the chair.
Okay.
So there is a recommendation for a regional fire chief. So just wondering what you see that position doing and how it supports the EOC and the emergency management program.
CAO?
I think that's based on a consultant recommendation, Mr. Chair. Perhaps they have some insight on that.
Okay, Ms. Amanda? Sorry, Ms. Newell.
That's okay. I'm going to pass this one to Sarah.
Thanks, Amanda. So that position doesn't necessarily need to be a regional fire chief. It may be a fire services administrator or a training services coordinator. The focus of the recommendation was the fire chiefs expressing that dedicated support person was a missing element at the moment in terms of their interaction with the corporate office. And they They articulated some examples of where that's leading to increased costs or increased time that they don't have. So around efficiencies, and again, providing that dedicated support and championing of what they need as a group. So it doesn't need to be a regional fire chief, and there are a range of positions established across the comparable regional districts that we looked at. But the RDOS does stand out in not having any sort of dedicated support person, whether that be a regional fire chief or fire services administrator. So that's the basis of that recommendation, is that whatever that job description turns out to be, that it's actually filling those gaps that the fire chiefs have identified, and that person is not there to be the boss of the fire chiefs as such. They're quite self-managing, but that they are providing that support, and that they have the skills and knowledge to be able to provide that support in the context of the provincial fire services.
Thank you. CAO?
I almost did you, Mr. Chair, and forgot to put my mic on. So the fire departments do have a support capability right now. They hire a contractor through their association. Okay, so the administrative support for the fire departments is intended to come through that. Now, from an emergency program point of view, with the way that we're structured now, under our regulatory bylaw, each of our 8 departments operates as a separate entity, and the chief has the operational control of the fire department. So they would determine when to respond or how to get involved in their community. We wouldn't give them direction from here as to what part they would play under the emergency program regulation. And each has, I think each has their own opinions on that as to what their role should be. So that's another issue that we need to straighten out, as to how we can best support the fire departments and how we can make the best use of them corporately.
Ms. Newell, you have something to respond to that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add, integrating the fire departments better with the RDOS emergency program, I think will be a key to your success. It will increase capacity. It will build that relationship if you guys are training and planning together, and just they feel more included, and they understand the program itself and how it operates during an emergency. I think will be quite integral to moving forward with that. But building that relationship, making sure that both parties understand roles, responsibilities, and how they fit into the organization, I think will take you a far way.
Thank you. Director Van Elven.
Thank you, through the chair. Ms. Newell, have you seen in the past, like under a state of emergency, have we been able to utilize people that are guests of the province, such as people that are in prison?
Can you elaborate?
Well, I mean, I think it was 217, 218 floods. I think they utilized some of the inmates to do sandbagging, like to create sandbags.
I do remember hearing about that, but I don't have any details as to how that came about. Maybe that's better for the CAO or someone else that was around.
Does the CAO have any response to our inmates, friends, the province?
We did use them, Mr. Chair, and I think under some circumstances, corrections will allow that. It costs them. They have to provide a supervisor, and they have to transport them to site. And of course, there's extra supervision required on that. So that wouldn't be something that we could work into our program right now. That would be a one-off that under certain circumstance, like a sandbag city, we may be able to use them in a controlled response atmosphere.
And
Thank you,
further to
CAO.
that, oops, sorry.
Sorry, you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Yes, if I may, please. So if somebody can clarify, who determines the state of emergency?
CAO?
That is defined under the Act. So the Emergency Program Act says that if there is people or infrastructure at imminent risk, that an emergency can be declared. And then how a local government sets up to declare a state of local emergency is described under the Act.
Thank you so much.
Director Holmes, I believe you're next.
I was just wondering, we were asked to send questions in advance, and I'm just wondering if those were sent through, and if so, if we get responses to those. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Newell, did you receive advance questions?
As far as I know, we only got one, and it was around the fire chief position, or the regional fire chief position. If there was others, I'm sorry I missed them, but happy to take them now.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? We are pushed for time. We're outside of our allotted timeline. So if there's something burning questions, this is the time. Do I have see any other hands? Oh, Director Monteith.
And through the chair, through your comparative with other regional districts, was there consideration to working closer with our member municipalities?
Ms. Newell?
Yeah, maybe I'll pass that one to Sarah.
Sure. The regional districts that we surveyed, they work with the member municipalities in a variety of ways. Most of them have mutual aid agreements in terms of their fire services. Some do have some other mutual aid agreements, but some, equally some are quite separate and distinct from their municipalities. So there was a real variety there around how the regional districts work. There weren't any clear themes that came through or best practice that seemed to apply to the RDOS naturally in that process.
Thank you. CAO Newell, and I just wanted to add, I know that we had a Q2 for protective service. Do we have something that we're kind of in the way of that we need to speed up?
We can defer the Q2 report, Mr. Chair, or bring it, or just take questions. Just wanted to say on the relationship with our member municipalities, I think very good right now. We are a regional program, so all of our 6 member municipalities are part of the emergency management program. And in fact, our establishment bylaw includes the whole region, and our regulatory bylaw sets up the Protective Services Committee as a policy group for the emergency management program, and it sets up the CAO group as the emergency planning team. So the budgets and all the other administrative details are supposed to go through the CAO group. And we do talk about those regularly at our CAO group meetings. And just recently, of course, we've combined the emergency services manager position. We've seconded a position from the city of Penticton, and we're working closely with that. And we hope that that will open up again, that relationship building with incorporated communities. And as far as I know, there are 2 others, town of Princeton and the town of Oliver have emergency program coordinators now. And those emergency program coordinators, I think, meet monthly on a coordination call, and we are working closely on the emergency support services. Basically, the regional district, when we're activated, we treat a reception center as a site now, and we engage the local community that's receiving our rural citizens to run the reception center. So There's always opportunities for improvement there and to work more closely. And again, that is one of those issues that we're going to have to figure out as to just exactly what the incorporated communities want to pay for under the regional program. Right now, it is just preparedness because the activities that benefit from the regional program are training, exercising, coordination, communication, providing some support when other communities are activated. So we are interrelated. There's no doubt about that. It's just where do we go in the future?
Thank you, CAO. CAO, do you think, do we have anybody that wants to make a motion to defer the Q2 if we don't have any further questions?
Could I suggest, Chair, that we just maybe recess, and if there's time at the end, we can get to it?
Great. So do I need a motion for recess, or can we
No,
just
you call it.
I'll call a recess then of Protective Services. Until
Thank you. We'll move straight in then to the Corporate Services Committee. We do have an agenda before us. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved, seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. First item up on the agenda today is a closed session with our auditors, and we'll be needing a motion to go in camera, but before we do that, it will be in accordance with section 901C and 901D of the Community Charter. The board closed the meeting to the public on the basis of labor relations and other employee relations and the security of the property of the regional district. It says municipality, but it should be the regional district. So looking for a motion to go in camera. Thank you. Seconded. Perfect. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And by consensus, we need to invite our auditors into this. And I do believe we also have legal representation if they're needed as well. And that would be Carolyn McEachran online. So as long as everybody's comfortable with that, I'll give Adam a second to get us into closed.